All right. So here in Mark chapter 9 and verse 2, we have Jesus and along with Peter, James, and John, and they're going to go up and have the story here of what's commonly known as the Mount of Transfiguration. So let's begin with Ronnie. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and read verses 2 through 4. And then Jimmy, if you would read verses 5 through 7. And then Kyle, if you'll read 9 through 11. And then Justin, if you'll read 12 and 13. Ronnie, go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Now, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up on a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His clothes became shining, exceedingly white, like snow, such as no launderer on earth can whiten them. And Elijah appeared to them with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus.
Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, is it good for us to be here? Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Well, he did not know what to answer, for they became terrified. Then a cloud formed, overshadowing them, and a voice out of the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. All at once they looked around and saw no one with them except Jesus alone.
And as they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising of the dead might mean. And they asked him, why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?
I'm reading from the New American Standard. And he said to them, Elijah does first come and restore all things. Yet now it is written of the Son of Man that he will suffer many things and be treated with contempt. But I say to you that Elijah has indeed come, and they did to him whatever they wished, just as it is written of him.
Does anybody remember where they had been just prior to this occasion? The area?
Were they in Caesarea Philippi?
Yeah, that was the last place that had been given to us, I believe. And Caesarea Philippi, where would it be in relation to the land of Israel? Anybody remember that?
Thinking sort of at the northern end.
Yeah, about as far north as you can go. And what was just to the north of Caesarea Philippi?
Bethsaida.
Okay. And in relation to what we're talking about here in verse 2, it says that Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them where? Where did Jesus lead them there in verse 2?
Brought them up onto a high mountain.
Yeah. And the New King James says an exceedingly high mountain. We understand if you know much about the geography in Israel, there are a lot of mountains in Israel, but they're not exceedingly high mountains. But would you know of an exceedingly high mountain that would be near Caesarea Philippi?
Mount Hermon.
Mount Hermon. And so it doesn't tell us, and I don't know that it's I'm not proposing that we make a pilgrimage to Mount Hermon every year to remember this occasion, but it is good as we go through the life of Jesus to kind of know where he's at, and so we maybe can even picture in our minds. I remember Brother Leon Malden talking about a mountain much further south that is if you go to Israel, generally referred to as the Mount of Transfiguration, one of the things he pointed out is, it's a mountain that's pretty easy to get tourists to. So when you go over there and they say, hey, this is the spot, it may or may not be. But it seems fitting that if they were in Caesarea Philippi, they're going up on an exceedingly high mountain, that possibly that is Mount Hermon. So one thing just to be aware of there is, be aware of what men teach, because they don't necessarily know. Always verify that with the scriptures. And so you could even apply that to what I've just said. The text doesn't say Mount Hermon, so maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But it was an exceedingly high mountain. And who went with him, Justin?
Peter, James, and John.
You ever thought about how Andrew might have felt about that? One day I was reading along and it just dawned on me the number of times that you see Peter, James, and John being taken by Jesus. And what happened to Andrew? I thought he was a part of that original group of disciples. We don't ever see him complaining, do we? I wonder if Andrew is the one who put the question or the comment in the box that he wanted Jesus to talk about cliques, because we got a clique going here. And I'm being a little facetious there, but I do think it is worth noting that just because you have a group of people who assemble and you're excluded from that group for whatever reason, doesn't mean that a clique has formed. Doesn't mean that you've been left out because they don't like you. Or there was a reason Jesus took these three men on this occasion. There's a reason in the Garden of Gethsemane that Jesus will take these same three men a little further with him. And that, not to say anything negative about the other disciples. As we go on through the text here, we have something taking place that these three men have never seen in their life, that no one on earth has ever seen in their life. And Joe, what's going on there?
It's the transfiguration.
Yeah.
Oh well, his appearance, the shining glory, of some sort.
And it describes the brightness, the whiteness, as such as no launderer could get things that white. When it tells us that it's Moses and Elijah who are appeared there with them, and the disciples seem to know that. Have you ever had anybody to question how did they know that it was Elijah and Moses there with Jesus? Anybody ever had that question in Bible class?
Not in Bible class, maybe some discussions among just some Christians, though. That is a good question.
Yeah.
They recognized who they were in the company with.
So how did they know? I'll ask the question. How did they know? Ian, you seem to be familiar with it.
I'm familiar with the question and the discussion that ensued. It seemed to be kind of more speculative. Perhaps Jesus told them, um, that might be the thing to think about. He could have, who knows? They could have been looking, and this again is speculative, but maybe Peter, James, and John, they heard Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah, and then their names were used. I mean, the text doesn't tell us, though. We have to be content with that. But they did recognize there was known. That's for sure.
And that was my point in asking that question. And maybe I'm wasting time by asking it, but I do want to try to get that point out there, because hopefully we'll have people watching this later, or maybe who are here now, that don't understand the need to just look at the text and take what the text gives us, and be content with what we're told and not worry so much about the things that we aren't told. But I have heard that discussion take place, and a lot of time being given to, well, how did they know? Well, at the end of the day, we don't know how they knew, but they knew. That's the point. That's the thing we need to learn. And so they knew what was going on. They knew this was Jesus in his glorified state. They knew Moses and Elijah were there and they were talking with Jesus. Do we know what they were talking about?
Hmm. Um,
Archer.
when you compare the gospel accounts, you look at Luke chapter 9. They were talking about Jesus's crucifixion.
That's right,
It's
his
going.
impending death. And that's a thing that we need to recognize. You know, we're studying through the book of Mark, and I like it that we're keeping our focus in Mark and we don't always feel compelled to go read the entirety of what Matthew, Luke, and even John has some parallel accounts to things that we'll see in Mark. But it is good as we're studying through the life of Jesus to see everything that each of the gospel accounts has to give, because sometimes it's very important. And here I think it adds a lot to our understanding, to know that, you know, Jesus had just talked to his disciples about his impending death. They didn't understand it. Now he's talking with Moses and Elijah about that. And I think perhaps there's another thing that we can maybe even see in that, because is there something to make of the fact that Moses and Elijah are here talking about the death of Jesus? And I'll open that to anybody that would like to comment on that. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot there.
Well, there is the idea that their deaths also came with unusual circumstances.
Okay. Yes, both
That is
Moses
a
and
link
Elijah.
that the three of them will share.
Yeah, I don't know that I thought about that before, but that is, all three of those men will be very, their deaths will be unique.
They were taken by God.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts about, you know, why Moses? Why Elijah? Why this discussion about his death? And maybe, um, let me read a passage from Luke chapter 24. Maybe you can get in my head then a little bit more
Okay.
about,
The law and the prophets.
yeah,
Each was a type of or foreshadowing figure of Christ.
yes. And not only just a foreshadowing of Christ, but a foreshadowing of even his death. You know, what was written concerning his sufferings. That, you know, this, and that's what the two men on the road to Emmaus, as Jesus taught. Have you not read? You know what was written. And so Moses and Elijah would really, I believe, stand for the entirety of the Old Testament, the history and the prophets. And the history and the prophets, Moses and Elijah, they spoke about this. So if y'all been reading and reading with understanding, maybe this shouldn't come as such a great surprise to you. Though I think we can look back and be a lot more critical of them than maybe we should be, because I doubt that we would have gotten it either. Um,
We have the interpretive key
yes.
to unlock the true meaning of the Old Testament, which they didn't really understand fully.
No. You say, well, they had Jesus, but Jesus promised the Holy Spirit in part to unlock that understanding, to bring to their remembrance all things that he had spoken, and then they could understand. And it's interesting as you're reading through the Gospels, you know, these things were written after the fact, and you will see each of the authors point to, we didn't understand that then, but now we've made that connection.
I probably also talked about in your study of Mark how the contrast between sight and being blind, people who see and who don't see, as you've gone through chapter by chapter, there's faith coming from unexpected places, and people are not, the disciples themselves are not held up as an example necessarily to emulate in the Gospel of Mark. You know, their failure after failure, and we identify with them and their lack of faith and their lack of insight.
Before we got on here, we were talking about the passage, and you connected this back to something earlier in chapter 8. And we did talk in that chapter 8 about the blind man and his sight. But what were you saying there, Joe?
I'd often wrestled with the double healing, you know, the double touch of the blind man, there? Why did he partially heal them when he could have healed him completely? And how, some people have suggested, it's not original to me, but some people have suggested that it in some ways symbolizes the partial insight of the disciples, as they know who he is, but they don't yet fully understand who he is. And so that's right after that, you have the transfiguration, you have the confession of Peter that he's the Christ, but yet he himself, rebukes the Lord, and so he doesn't understand fully. And that is us, as we're reading the Gospels, there's things we understand about Christ, but then there's also things in which we're still growing in faith and don't understand everything we should understand.
Have y'all ever felt maybe like Peter felt here? Mark tells us that Peter, he offers some. What does he offer to do?
Build a tabernacle.
Yeah, and to build
Tree.
each of these men, Moses and Elijah and Christ, a tabernacle. And the idea of a tabernacle, we think of it, I think, in religious terms of a place of worship, and maybe that was a connection there. But the word tabernacle, what did it actually mean?
Dwelling.
A dwelling
Tent.
or a tent, a place to abide. And so possibly the idea that Peter is suggesting there is, hey, you three guys are here. Moses and Elijah have come to join us. Y'all need somewhere to stay. Let me build 3 tabernacles. I don't necessarily think that he's thinking to worship these men in some way, but just a place to abide. And
There's also we have a glory here, and I think someone mentioned Luke's account. He actually mentions the word glory several times in that transfiguration account. Well, in their mind, what do you have? You have the tabernacle of Moses, and once he built it, just as the Lord had commanded him at the end of Exodus, it was filled with glory. So the glory of the Lord, and accompanied with Moses, well, we have the Moses tabernacle, we got Elias here, we have you here. Maybe we should build 3 of those things.
yeah,
But as you pointed out before we got on the call, he didn't know what to say.
he didn't know what to say.
So he said something.
Isn't that funny? We don't ever do that, do we? We don't know what to say, but we got to say something. So just
Like right now.
like right now. How does that go generally when you do that?
Perfectly all the time. No, in all seriousness, no. Sometimes that does not go as planned.
So when you're in a situation like Peter and you're seeing some amazing things and you don't know what to make of it, you don't know what to say, what might be the best thing to do?
Not say anything.
Listen, watch and listen, and just wait to learn. And if we do say anything, maybe it would be like a number of times when the disciples, I think, do the right thing, and they will go to Jesus and say, hey, can you explain that to us? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I have one other thought.
Okay.
The mention of fear in verse 6, at least my version,
Yeah.
that they were afraid. Have you noticed that coming up several times in the gospel?
Yeah.
The theme of fear at different points.
When they saw Jesus coming on the water, they were afraid.
It goes all the way through the resurrection when they flee the tomb and they're afraid.
Fred,
Yes, ma'am.
can I ask a question?
You sure can.
The apostles knew Elijah and Moses, yet they had lived all these hundreds of years before, and they were still living. And my question is that why some people believe, or is that a scripture to use that we will know each other in heaven?
Yeah, I think this is pertinent to that question, because we are looking at men who are in what maybe we would call the afterlife. They're no longer here in this world, but they do have an existence in the world beyond. We also see Abraham in the story of the rich man and Lazarus, when Lazarus was being comforted in the bosom of Abraham, and the rich man knew who Abraham was. And he addresses him as Father Abraham. And so those 3 men, Abraham, Moses, Elijah, yes, they were very special men in the plan of God, but they were men. James tells us that Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and yet here they are doing something after their life here on earth has ended, and there is a knowledge. So yes, I do think that it bears on the discussion. Joe,
I was just going to say, when Jesus said, "I am the God of the living and not the dead," he was applying that to Abraham and the fathers that already died. Is implies that they haven't lost their being or their personality, or that we exist even into eternity as a distinct personality.
One other thing, when it talked about, when I talked about knowing them, now they were not, my mind's exactly trying to say, and it's not coming out like I wanted to, but it's kind of like we see each other as humans, but we'll see each other as spiritual in the future. Is that correct? Or am I going down the wrong path?
I think in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul, anticipates a question: what kind of body will we be raised with? And he points out that God made the terrestrial bodies, he's made the celestial bodies, he's made every body perfect for their environment. And so in the heavenly realm in which we'll be, we will have a body that is perfectly suited for that realm. And that's the only thing that I would say along with that is sometimes when people say spiritual body, people will kind of back and say, well, wait a minute, no, there's going to be a bodily resurrection. But I think to take the word spiritual and completely separate it from any kind of real substantial thing is a mistake, because the spiritual is real. I think we sometimes think about it, it's just all in our mind. That's the spirit realm, but the spirit realm is real, and there are real bodies in that spirit realm. But the answer to your question is, if the Apostle Paul didn't know, I don't think we can know either. But it will be a body perfectly suited for what we need to do and where we will be.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a good question.
Thanks for both of those questions. Coming on down here.
The reason why Jesus said that flesh and blood will not inherit the kingdom. Flesh and blood will not go into heaven.
So we know it won't be a
I think we see
fleshly.
here, that's the reason why he was transfigured from his normal body that he had while he was there with Peter, James, and John. Something happened with his body. It was a change. It was kind of like, well, if you look at that word up, they're transfigured. It's the same word we get from when a butterfly turns into from a cocoon, goes in as a caterpillar, and there's a metamorphosis of this change. There's a change it's done. So that's the same word we see here in transfigured. It's a metamorphosis. There's a change that happened. And in the other scriptures, if you look at them, even his face changed. It was a change that took place.
Yeah, we have an Old Testament analogy of this, which was Moses coming down from Mount Sinai, and he was in the presence of God, and the glory was on his face, but his was fading away. But when Jesus rose from the dead, his resurrection body was unique, wasn't it? Because he could appear in certain places. But also he took food, but it was a resurrection body. And then what you were mentioning before, we don't know what we will be like, but we will be like him. We will have a resurrection body. He made a good point that it's not going to be flesh and blood like we think about it, but we don't know what it'll be like. We'd just be speculating.
One other passage that might be worth mentioning in the discussion is Revelation chapter 1, when John hears the voice and he turns around, and the description that he gives there of the one that he saw who was identified as Jesus, it's nothing like what they would have seen here on earth. But again, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says it'll be a body. We don't know what it'll be like. As you said, we'll be like him. We'll be glorified. And yes, Ian.
I feel like I maybe should have just been quiet, let you finish your thought there. Just to complement what you were saying and where to leave it. 1 John 3, first couple of verses talks about how even John, as he's writing toward the end of the first century, didn't have all of the answers about what type of body we would have. But he did assure us as readers that we would be like Jesus when we're changed. And as you pointed out, 1 Corinthians 15, God has provided and he will provide. 1 Thessalonians 4 does give us reassurance, though, for those that have gone on before us, and we're not to fret over them, that there will be a resurrection and we'll all be together, those who are called up to meet with the Lord in the air.
Good. Kyle, I know our time was running short. I'd like to say just a few other things, but there at McRaven Road, y'all been having a series on the resurrection, and didn't last week you all have a lesson
We
that
did.
dealt with
We did a lesson specifically on the resurrection body, and the key passages to that discussion have I was just kind of making a list over here. I think they've all been, not all obviously, but the vast majority of them have brought into this discussion. I was just happy to hear it going, yep, that's the one we need to turn to. We need to go to 1 Corinthians 15. We need to talk about, things like that. But yeah, it's been really, really good.
So we've covered pretty much everything we can know.
Yeah. And the short answer is we don't know all of it. And I would say we don't even know the half of it. But the assurances that we do have are that God is in control of the process and that we will be changed into a body that is suitable for where we are headed. Now, when you try to describe what exactly is that body, it's like trying to describe where exactly are we going. It defies explanation because it is that wonderful. It's that powerful. Go ahead. Sorry.
You said the half had not been told, and it just made me mindful of the Queen of Sheba,
Yep.
who came and her breath was taken away. Like, I didn't believe it, but now I know that not the half had been told, but I think we will all have that experience, but I don't think half would even begin to describe the amount of new information, knowledge that we're going to get.
Of Jesus, he said one greater than Solomon is here. Just imagine being in his presence. I wanted to make a quick point about our text back in Mark 9. If we put together several of the details that we have Moses along with Elijah and Jesus and three others on top of a mountain. You have the cloud overshadowing the mountain. You have the voice coming out of the mountain. That all points straight to Sinai. And the last time Israel was really in that sort of situation. But what is really different in this case is instead of Moses's face shining, we have Jesus is shining, you might say, from head to toe. And the last time they were in this context, it was listen to God. Listen to what I'm telling you. Here's my law. Here's my message. Even when Elijah is on his mountaintop experience, it's listen to God. In this context, it's listen to Jesus. And that's a huge thing to note here in verse 7. God has said once before already in Mark, this is my beloved son. This time he says, listen to him.
When he says listen to him, where are Moses and Elijah at that point?
Yeah, they're gone.
They're gone. So to understand the Old Testament is important. We need to study it. We need to learn it because they do talk about Christ. They bring us to Christ. But once we're to Christ, we need to understand that Moses and Elijah, they have gone, and we need to listen to the Lord.
Hey,
That's
Brad.
interesting. Thanks for bringing in those mountaintop experiences. Each one had a face-to-face interaction with God or close interaction experience with God on a mountaintop, and then we have those coming. So, you speculate Mount Hermon. Maybe they went south to Sinai.
In this period, it is worth mentioning that in this period, if you take a map and you follow their movements, they move more during this time period when he seems to be trying to get away from the crowds and be alone with his disciples. It's just a zigzag, and they will go great distances at times. So
Mark is actually, carefully picking out things in order to craft what he's trying to get across in his gospel.
Hey, Brad.
Christ is the Son of God.
somebody say
Brad,
something.
just real quick before I know, but when I think of this, and the fact that that his garments were radiantly white, to me, every time I read this account, it's just a reminder to me of really what heaven is all about, right? Heaven is all about the glory of the Son and the glory of the Father. And I think so many times we think about, we sing songs where we talk about the streets of gold, and I'm not knocking those songs. I'm not saying that we shouldn't sing it. I'm not saying that. But I think sometimes it's very easy to lose focus of what heaven is about. Heaven is not about those things. Heaven is about Jesus and God and his Father. And so if we get to heaven and heaven is a dirt road, but at the end of that road is a tent and Jesus and his Father in that tent, well, that's the greatest place you would ever want to be, because it's all about them. And so anytime I read this, that's what I think of, that this is, you're seeing Jesus transformed and transfigured, and he is in this white garment. And that's what being in a relationship with God can bring you. It makes you pure, and to be in heaven and to be in that and not be afraid of that, man, that's what we should all be hoping for.
That's great. I appreciate that, Justin. I actually wanted to say a few more things about verses 11 through 13, but I think what Justin just said is a great place for us to stop and keep our attention there. And so next week when we pick up, let's talk just a little bit more about that end section concerning Elijah, and then we'll move on from there. But I do think that's a great place to keep our focus right now as we leave the study, being with the Lord, being with our Heavenly Father for eternity. What a wonderful blessing. And it's been a blessing to be with you all here today, and thank you for all the comments and questions, and we'll look forward to being back with you next week at 11:30 East Central, 12:30 Eastern. Till then, keep reading and be blessed.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.